All right. Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a good end of the semester. I know it can get chaotic at times. Totally understand that, but thank you for taking the time to be here. We want to thank, do we have any barely initiated members? Awesome. I love that. Okay. At least four. And thank you for those who are here who are already in mortarboard and graduating this year. So first off, let's welcome, we already welcomed everyone. And if you haven't done so already, feel free to grab some food, drinks. A few notes before we begin. We're going to have a 5 to 10 minute question session. And then we're going to try to clear out the room by 5:30. So let's be careful with dropping any food because they will have another event in here. So that's just something really quickly. And then if you ever see, we have the front desk person here, just thank them for making the time to create this space for us. It was a little bit complicated to get a space. We're really thankful to be here in the Humanities Center. And yeah, any questions before we begin? Okay, awesome. So then, thank you for understanding all of the previous said, and we will have Alexander introduce Dr. Reynoso to start the lecture.
Thank you. My name is Alexander, and I am the outgoing chapter president. And Dr. Zulema Reynoso is an artist, teatrista, adjunct professor, educational consultant, and researcher working with P-12 institutions and educational technology companies across the U.S. on meeting the needs of English learners and building educator capacity in English language development, pedagogy, and instruction. With a PhD in education for social justice from the University of San Diego's School of Leadership and Education Sciences in the Department of Learning and Teaching, Zulema employs art-based research methods and youth participatory action research with multilingual learners to disrupt deficient ideologies and ineffective language instruction. She has had a diverse background as she has gotten to where she is now. Given she earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Art History and Museum Studies from California State University, Long Beach, she has worked in various museums and spearheaded exhibitions throughout her time there. Zulema later earned her single-subject teaching credential in social justice at California State University, Long Beach, and a Master of Arts in Educational Administration from California State University, Northridge. She taught in the greater Los Angeles area and in New York City public schools serving the South Bronx, Brooklyn, and Upper East Side. During her time as a teacher, she conducted research on the impact of critical visual literacy and explicit academic vocabulary instruction for boosting literacy skills to access grade-level content and increase student achievement in global history and geography as measured by the New York State Regents exam. She has presented in many conferences and associations on the use of graphic novels to promote literacy among at-risk male adolescents. Zulema's art and culture work extends to the stage, where she contributes as an actor, stage, and costume designer to theater productions that center on issues of social justice within historically marginalized communities. Please give a round of applause for Dr. Zulema Reynoso.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. I know this is a very busy time of the year and in the semester, so I really appreciate everyone who's here. And I'm not sure if we're broadcasting live on Zoom, but if there's a world out there, hello. So my name is Dr. Zulema Reynoso, and I'm beyond honored to be with you here today to deliver my last lecture called Dear Students, I Remember You. I'm going to try not to get emotional. For those of you who nominated me for this incredible honor, right back at you. I believe that one powerful way in which we can acknowledge the land on which we stand is to elevate the descendants who maintain stewardship of the traditions, language, and the land. This is my friend and colleague, Johnny Bear Contreras of San Pascual Kumeyaay Band. Johnny Bear's sculptural repertoire includes monumental sculptures that can be found throughout California, including the campus of San Diego State, La Jolla Historical Society, and our very own USD campus, to name just a few spots. I have the distinct privilege of working with Johnny Bear on a Theater for Youth Audiences production called Somos Aire, which is part of the Far South Border North grant taking place at Casa Familiar in San Isidro. So we're creating sets and props for this special production that's going to open in June. June 8th is when the full feature production is going to be showcased. And the play is about air quality and environmental justice impacting the border town community of San Isidro. Johnny Bear's beautiful sculptures and artistic ethos embodies Kumeyaay ways of being through and through. And I encourage you to visit his Instagram, which I feature here. His handle is @JohnnyBearArt. I want to also acknowledge and offer thanks to all the staff that maintains this wonderful space that we're in today and keeps it beautiful for us to use. Okay, so today's talk is titled, Dear Students, I Remember You. And it's really a talk dedicated to all of my students as I reflect on our time together. This being my last lecture, when I was thinking about what I would address, the first thing that came to mind were my students, because I always thought if I did have to go, how would I feel about it? Would my life be fulfilled? Would it be complete? And I said, absolutely. I have done so much in my life since I was very, very young, and I feel good about leaving this world tomorrow if I had to. Hopefully not. And now I'll start by pointing out two interesting but slightly unsettling things. The first is that 3 days ago, I learned that I have to speak for an hour and 15 minutes, which normally wouldn't be a problem considering that I love to speak. I thought this was going to be more like a TED Talk, like 20 minutes. But that's okay. I apparently have to hold the floor, which is definitely a little bit of a trickier ask. So I'll try to keep this as exciting and engaging as I possibly can by throwing in a lot of images, some old embarrassing pictures of myself, some cartoons I created because, well, I am an artist. Also, just a kind of a note, you're going to see a lot of drawings sprinkled throughout, and that's because when I started my work with students, we didn't have camera phones. We're talking like 1990s, so pictures, the use of cameras might have been a little creepy for students if I just started taking their pictures all the time. So you'll see as I start going through the presentation and time passes, there'll be more and more footage of my students, maybe even some videos. So hopefully I'll get to share those and you can kind of see the progress of technology along with, my age. Even so, I am shamelessly notorious for going over my speaker presentation time at all major conferences, which you can see here at the Association of Teacher Educators, in which I presented this past March. I got away with it because our facilitator forgot to start the timer, but I pretended to have mine going, but I have mine going today. It's right now. So I know it's working. I think, hey, it's okay, whatever. It's doing something different. In any case, so I do this often, and it's not really cool actually to go over your time. I'm going to try not to go over the time today, but I do love to talk, and if you get me going on my students, I could go on forever. It was really hard to really distill the memorable stories that I have with my students, especially about the lessons that they've taught me, because there are too many to include, even in 1 hour and 15 minutes. Okay, so the second interesting thing, and a little bit unsettling, is that Randy Pausch, the person who made this last lecture thing popular, was 46 years old when he delivered his lecture at Carnegie Mellon. He's just shy of his 47th birthday, which was the year of his passing due to pancreatic cancer. And so I'm 46 too, just a few months shy of 47. So either this is a really eerie coincidence or a clever planning scheme on the part of the awesome lecture organizers. In any case, I'll lean into this opportunity as a hypothetical last lecture rather than a prophetic one. But the fact of the matter is that life is uncertain and we don't always know when our number is up. And like everyone who spends their teenage years in angst sitting in dark rooms listening to Mozart's Requiem, pondering the meaning of life, I have often thought about how my life has played out this far and whether I'd be comfortable leaving this world. So the short answer is yes. I would be happy leaving this world anytime because I firmly believe that I have lived a life of service, especially where kids are concerned. Children are sacred, and I've always believed that. And that comes from my service as a teacher. So aside from the odd coincidence about being 46 and delivering this lecture, is that 46 is still pretty young. I think so anyway. But for someone like me who started working as an educator at the age of 18, it means that I've spent more years teaching than I have doing anything else. So it's fair to say that I've been raised by the teaching profession and raised along other kids, at times not too much older than I was. Hence the title of my lecture, Dear Students, I Remember You. So I'm going to start with a little background about myself and then touch upon my very first teachers who inspired me to go into education. Then I'll start talking about the lessons that I learned from my students by telling their stories as I remember them. And I could go on and on about each of my students since they occupy so many dimensions and facets in the kaleidoscope of my memories. But I'll highlight a few that I want to share with you. Memories are strange and nonlinear. So, when one comes up, it triggers another one from a different time and space. So my presentation might do a little bit of time hopping, so just bear with me. So for those of you who don't know me, I am an educator, artist, mom, wife, Chicana Latina scholar, and an adjunct professor here at USD that has the absolute privilege of teaching in the College of Arts and Sciences, and I teach the Liberal Studies 100 course in the fall. This course was gradually released to me from a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Gabriel Núñez Soria, who asked me a couple of years ago if I'd be interested in co-teaching this course with him, and I couldn't say no. I'd already gleaned the energy and provocative discourse in this liberal studies course a year before when I presented a guest lecture on multilingual learners and the importance of recognizing language as a human right. I understood the importance of these courses and the possibility for transforming our worldviews early in our education journeys, and this was my chance to contribute to this transformation. It was also my chance to participate in the lives of undergraduate students, to reconnect with the undergraduate student in me that started out in a place much like this one, but more on that later. I also teach in the School of Leadership and Education Sciences in the teacher credentialing program, and in the fall I'll be teaching a course in the PhD in Education for Social Justice program, where I also graduated and proudly earned the Joy Spencer Champion Dissertation Award. I was part of the inaugural class. I was actually the first person to defend in the entire program, so I always have that to say. So teaching in the credential program allows me to make meaning alongside my students as they prepare to become educators. And one can say we connect, because they're already in the field, by swapping tales from the field. So we're colleagues from the get-go, and we learn together, we grow together, and amplify the grace that we have for ourselves and each other. At the beginning of the course, I always tell my rising teachers, don't worry about the points and grades for this class. You'll get your points. We have more important work to attend to that transcends points, because we are responsible for the outcomes in our children's lives, and it is the children who will one day grade you on how well you did by them. So defining a teacher. I know different folks have many ideas and ways to define a teacher, and heaven knows I have, or at least I remember collecting tons of mugs and Hallmark cards that my students gave me over the years, and that my husband made me donate several times over the years, because we couldn't keep them all in our 450 square foot apartment in New York. So for me, however, to serve as a teacher means the ultimate form of sharing. So in today's terms, we like to throw the word radical in front of everything to add that extra boost of emphasis, so I'm gonna follow suit and throw radical sharing. I believe that radical sharing is what defines a teacher. It means that we share because we're selfless, we share because we deeply care, and we share because we want others to succeed. We share because we are truly givers. And there's an important distinction I make, however, between sharing and giving, right? The giving could potentially be seen as a one-way transaction where, for example, I give you something because you didn't have it before. And that's not quite where we want teachers to kind of operate. And that's because someone by the name of Paulo Freire might not approve. He believed that students are not vessels to be filled, and that they actually do come to our classrooms with knowledge and with gifts of their own. So that's why I stick to this idea of radical sharing, because it starts from the acknowledgement that everyone brings something special to our space of learning. Then I share what I have or what I know to add on to what you have and what you know. So sharing can show up in terms of time, skills, resources, ideas, and artwork. One of the coolest things about sharing is that there's room for reciprocity, which means I get to learn from you too. Chicana feminists like me know this because we're deeply invested in this idea of reciprocity, where we ensure that everyone is taken care of and benefiting in ways that uplift us all. So when we learn together, we grow together. We are also invested in the idea of sharing because it's important for our communities to thrive. When one of us succeeds, we all succeed. And then when one of us succeeds, we all succeed because what happens is we tend to go back to our communities and we tend to share the things that we learn and those codes of power that led us to succeed. And then you know what happens? The knowledge that you shared just grew exponentially when you shared it with someone else and they took it in new and unforeseen directions. You see, that person maybe built on some of your ideas in ways that you never thought possible. And then you not only learned from them, but you saw them that much more for their gifts. And if you're open to it, if you are able to yield your role as a teacher and become a student, you can receive this experience as one of the most amazing gifts. So my talk today will be on just that, on honoring the learning my students gifted me when I was their teacher to let them know that I remember them. And also to encourage you to do the same. Help someone do something, learn something, or be something by sharing your knowledge with them, and then watch what they do with it. It's one of the most powerful things in the world that you can do, and you'll be a better person for it. Then teach them to pay it forward and share what they know with others. So I always think of my students like this. So maybe they show up with yellow. I say, hey, you don't have a blue. Can I give you this blue? I happen to have some. And then before I know it, I didn't know that blue and yellow could create a green. I didn't even see the green coming. This happened a lot throughout my career. I would do something with students, teach them something, and they would take it in a direction I had never expected, and it truly is a gift. Okay, so my talk's gonna focus on the following. I'm gonna start by talking about how teaching and art go hand in hand, because that's where I locate myself, at the intersection of those two worlds, art and teaching. And then I'll move to the big takeaways about the important lessons my students taught me, including the idea that showing up is everything, but showing up is excited to learn with students takes everything to a whole new level. Then I'll talk about how everybody can learn, but we do it better when we see ourselves in the learning. I'll talk about paying attention to the forks in the road and letting your heart lead the way, and to push through the noise and the fear behind the failures of others, because you are different. To create a nourishing space grounded in beautiful designs, rich language, food, and dignity. Then I'll also talk about art as access and how access is an art. And then how to counter failure with joy and bold choices. And finally, the gift of language and literacy as the most precious gift you can give someone. Okay. So teaching and art go hand in hand. No, really they do. You see, my dad was an artist, and my mom was a teacher. So what do you get when you combine the two? You get me, an artist teacher, and my sister Mabel, who came along 13 months later, and she's a playwright teacher, both of us artists. So what happens when you force two artists to share a room for the greater part of their childhood? You get a whole lot of bickering sisters who fight over this weird Barbie hair braider that came out in the 80s, and this weird little purple chair, and it would just like twist the barb, but we fought over that thing so much. And I actually found a picture of it. I could only find a picture of the package in Spanish, but I thought that was really weird. Gosh, that thing was so strange. And now it just kind of twisted the hair up in strange ways. But that was one of the hot commodities that we had from the 80s, which is when I grew up. Okay, so basically, it's the way it's always worked. The way that it's always worked is that my sister generates the written material, and I somehow make it manifest visually. So we created two children's books called I Only Like Dogs and Skyride. I Only Like Dogs is about my sister's resentment toward our mom for not letting us have any pets growing up. The other one is called Skyride, and it's about my sister's first son, or her first child, Dally, my nephew, and his early bizarre childhood obsession with Von Rolls or Skyrides. When Dally was very little, he would go to the zoo and spend almost the entire day just riding back and forth in the basket, as he called. So in this book, Dally's a little bit older, and he falls asleep in one of the baskets and awakens to discover a whole new world where the animals come alive at the zoo. It was really fun to illustrate, and I took great joy in learning about the very specific pieces of the Von Rule, which is more than I think anybody might want to know, but it's in the book. And I will say this, there are a few hardcore Von Rule aficionados out there in the world who really love this book. So in the spirit of support and loyalty, shout out to Von Roll Mike for all the love and support in creating this book. And in the spirit of Randy Pausch's lecture about fulfilling your childhood dreams, illustrating a children's book was one of them for me. So Mabel and I, our collaborations spill into each other's worlds because, again, she's a teacher, I'm a teacher, she's an artist, I'm an artist. We kind of go into each other's realms. And so Mabel teaches playwriting in prison, and I regularly support her work to give life to the final scripts written by the incarcerated residents over a period of 12 to 8 weeks that she works with them. The work that they create is not only a reflection of their untapped brilliance that went tragically unrecognized in schooling spaces, and they'll tell you that themselves, but it's also a reflection of the respect and joy that my sister brings to the residents as they generate beauty in the most constrained and dehumanizing spaces that is prison. So it's just one way in which teaching and art go hand in hand in restorative ways. And I'm fortunate enough to get to participate in it, to infuse their handwritten pages of scripts with every ounce of creativity, and I dig really deep as an actor to make big choices in the roles that I play, because I know the stakes are high for this group of students and playwrights. Their souls show up in their work, and often in the form of allegorical animal narratives, like the fish I once played. So I'll never forget the split-second decision to go big in front of a room full of residents to embody an incredible role in a heartwarming tale of a wisecracking fish who was discarded into a toilet by his owner after he'd had enough of his fishy sarcasm. The owner, finding himself down on his luck, walks along the marina until he was greeted by a familiar voice. And I'm going to try and do it for you all. I can't believe I did this in front of a big, by the way, they still remember it. So I had bright red lipstick on at the time, and I said this, "Hey, is it really you?" And so I did this for a good 15 minutes, because that's how long it took to play the part. It was a hit. I couldn't tell, though, because their faces were just kind of like looking at me like, what are you doing? But later on, I came to know that my sister said that that was one of the best performances that they felt they saw, and I was very honored by that. So making big choices is big. So in this beautiful play, the two characters reconnected, and it was really a powerful play about forgiveness and about friendship, which is a recurrent theme in a lot of the residents' plays. So that day, the teacher and me learned that there are too many talented and extraordinary young people that go through our schools unseen and unheard. Too many we let slip through. The few times that the residents have an opportunity to reflect on their lives and share out, they'll tell you that there was no one in their youth that made them feel like they mattered. What's more is that they too have children out there in our schools right now. Are we looking out for them? I remember meeting a few back when I was 18 or 19 years old, and I remember we observed a strict code of confidence and never used words like jail or prison. We simply said that their mom or dad was away. That these fourth graders even shared this intimate detail with me was amazing enough. Never mind that they took the time to educate me on conversational etiquette related to the subject. That was a powerful lesson. So a note about arts and corrections programs such as Playwrights Project, the organization that I often credit with filling my life with invaluable opportunities to serve as a theater artist in correctional facilities. These arts and corrections programs have the potential to restore and sometimes awaken the creative inside individuals. Many of the residents leave prison and find it extremely difficult to transition to life outside the confines of carceral life. But organizations such as Playwrights Project hold space for them to continue creating outside of prison. And this is sometimes a lifeline for individuals who struggle with feeling accepted by their families or by society as a whole. They're kind of like affinity groups for creative writing. And I find that the neatest thing is that when these folks move on from being participants in a program to actual paid facilitators that actually get hired by Playwrights Project to run these programs. And it's a really cool wraparound service that they're able to stay in touch and find support both inside and outside. So I can go on about Playwrights Project forever. If you have a chance, I encourage you to engage with them. They constantly have activities and events going on in the community. So as part of the organization's commitment to supporting arts and correction is their commitment to supporting my sister's work. For some reason, she gets away with everything, and they constantly back her crazy projects up. And so the fact of the matter, she really is talented, and they pretty much let her get away with anything. So brings me to my next project, or our next collaboration. I recently created the sets and props and even acted in her play called Remember That Time, which toured California correctional facilities, a few public schools, and some public theater venues. So here's the blurb from the program. Remember That Time is about an 11-year-old Carol pursuing the answer to the question, can we be a family? Through written stories, Carol travels from Paris to deserted islands with her father, who is serving a life sentence in prison. This funny and heartwarming adventure story will prompt laughter and compassion as you dive in to get a deeper glimpse into Carol's complicated family dynamics. And the play was actually shown here at USD a few weeks ago for the Souls Diversity Symposium. We never imagined that the production would grace so many spaces. And despite the fact that I designed all of the set pieces out of foam and PVC pipes, on the off chance that it would make it inside prisons, we never dreamed it would actually happen. But that it did was beyond all of our expectations. So aside from being in a room where men allowed themselves to be emotionally vulnerable in what's probably the last place you might expect it, the most powerful remark I heard was when one of the residents, who's apparently known for not speaking much in general, said, "For me, the teacher and the puppets were the glue of the whole play." Struck me to my core, because who starred as the teacher and the puppeteer? That's right, me, also known as the glue. So there's another way I show up to my sister's world of teaching and art. And conversely, Mabel shows up in my spaces. This is one of the classrooms at Souls. And she comes into my spaces to demonstrate for teachers how theater can create access points for building community, language, and a general sense of joy in learning spaces. So if you've taken any of my classes, you know how much I love theater games, and we usually kick off one of our classes doing something silly to get our creative energies going or get our bodies moving. I even hosted one class where we opened by juggling scarves, and just everybody had their try at learning how to juggle scarves, and I highly recommend it. I had just completed a course at the Old Globe called Clowning in the classroom. Super recommend it. For me, if there's any way to infuse art into any classroom, I'll take the opportunity, be it theater or visual arts. All right. So here's a little bit about my childhood and my first teachers. So teaching and art go hand in hand. I didn't really know that or quite understand that until much later. But it did show up in all my teaching spaces in which I had the privilege of working. Okay, so here's the part where I highlight little bits and pieces of my childhood and the very short journey toward my first teaching gig, because you'll remember that I was only 18 when I started. So I was born in Tijuana. My mom insisted that we, and I say we because I was in her tummy, that we actually drive from our house in LA 2 hours or so to Tijuana, just so that I would be born in Mexico. Okay, so this fact might be a little confusing, because if you're all at all familiar with the Border Patrol checkpoint on the northbound side of the 5 freeway at around Camp Pendleton, San Onofre, it's on the northbound side, not the southbound side. So why are we going south when the more popular idea and the more convenient one that doesn't eventually require you at the age of 3 to go into a scary naturalization office and try to scribble your name on an official document of citizenship? It's really simple. My grandfather, also known as Tata, was an OBGYN. And he was the director of the Hospital General of Tijuana. And he was going to roll out the red carpet for his first granddaughter. But things didn't go as planned, and I came quite suddenly, and there were no red carpets. But I heard there was something about nuns trying to get my mom to stop insisting that she had to go to the restroom. And then there was Tata, who actually ended up saving my life. I was born blue, I was born lifeless, and he literally breathed life into me. And I think he and I always had a special connection after that. And I can say that right now because I know my sister's not here, but I'm pretty sure I was his favorite. He was an artist too. Just being recorded, huh? He was an artist too, and an inventor. He invented the coolest gadgets out of his syringes. So back in his day, they used glass syringes. And he made perfume cologne dispensers out of them, and he would carry them in his pocket, and they were kind of neat. He always liked inventing little trinkets and gadgets. So he was, also a very visionary leader and an inspirational leader, and he actually opened the very first state-of-the-art burn unit in the hospital, in Tijuana Hospital. It was the first of its kind to serve the bulk of the population who didn't have access to private insurance in Tijuana. We used to say it was para la gente de Tijuana. So from him, I learned that service goes hand in hand with leadership. And after a few weeks, we went back to our house in LA in a small suburb called Bellflower. My dad was a sign painter, and my mom was studying to be a teacher. So my parents were still pretty young when they had us, so I saw them going through school. So even though my mom wasn't an artist at least by her standards. I would challenge that today because I think everyone is an artist. She taught me that good teaching is itself an art. She was my best teacher and is now my best collaborator and thought partner. She really knew how to set my sister and I up for success, and she always looked for the best school she could find to ensure that we had high-quality learning experiences that nourished our minds and our spirits. So here's the class picture of the first school that I attended. That was my preschool class at Sunshine Preschool in Bellflower, California, circa 1980. This is the way I thought school should be. Pretending to go on a cruise ship to Hawaii on a cardboard ship made by our teachers, playing Hawaiian music, wearing skirts made out of brown paper bags stapled together, a few green leis, some fruit punch and cookies. Look at that, 43 years later, and I can still remember how bright and sunny that day was. I remember the music, I remember the treats we had, I remember the funky smell inside the boat, and I remember all the kids fighting to look through that window. In fact, I remember it so vividly, I was able to cartoon it here. It was better than The Love Boat, which was a really popular show at the time. So, that is what a great teacher does. A great teacher stays in the memories of their students, and enough for me to remember these memories and these teachers in ways where I can even cartoon those experiences. All right. When I first began college at a small private university, not too different from this one, I found it really difficult to connect with folks. I had a partial art scholarship and made up another part of the tuition with work study, and the rest was paid by my folks. So unlike this university, however, I can't remember any professor really ever talking to me or taking an interest in me. I remember I struggled to find my people. This, compounded with the fact that our family fell on really hard times in a myriad of ways, made it impossible for me to stay at the university. In fact, I remember the day the registrar informed me that I couldn't register for classes for the following semester because of my outstanding tuition. So I left school and I scrambled to find a place to live and some sort of a job. But there was an important lesson here that I didn't appreciate at the time. It's the kind of lesson that you discover in retrospect when you find yourself in a position that you never even thought was going to be part of your life, like teaching in an institution of higher learning and working with undergraduate students, say in a liberal studies 100 class. So these days, that experience helps me to make concerted efforts to connect with my students. And the first thing I do on the first day of class with my liberal studies students is to let them know about my story and to let them know, in the words of Demi Lovato, it's okay not to be okay. And so it's okay to ask for help. And I've had several who've taken me up on that, actually, and I was able to show up for them in some way, and I'm really happy I was able to do that because I learned that's what great teachers do. They show up for their students, excited to learn with them. The unexpected emails of gratitude that show up for me at the end of the semester about what it meant to be part of our learning community during their life's rough moments are among the greatest gifts that students give me. Also, work like this, which I'm showing with their permission. That's what this work is all about. And since my being here was because someone in my liberal studies classes or one of my students thought that it'd be a good idea to invite me here to speak, I'll kick off my list of things by honoring them. So here we go. To all my amazing liberal studies students, I remember you. Okay. So I went back to the neighborhood where it all started, back to Bellflower, California. I left my university to go to Cerritos Community College because we go back to the places we remember, we go back to the places that are familiar. My folks went there when I was little, so I figured it made sense for me to go there too. It was inexpensive, and it was like the world had opened up and I could design my ultimate plan for learning. I wanted to be an artist. Actually, after taking a few classes and enduring the dehumanizing crits, as we called them, which is basically where you display your work in class and everyone, including the professor, takes cheap shots at your work, I made a slight adjustment to my course of study and switched over to art history. The professors, so truth be told, the 2D and the 3D, so two-dimensional and three-dimensional courses that I took were also pretty terrible. I didn't do very well in those. And the ceramics class is by far the course that broke the camel's back. I'm going to tell you the story of that because the professors were of no help. And I remember not to be like that if a student ever asked me for help. So in my ceramics class, we had to make a coil pot. And we had to bring in a picture of what we wanted to create. If you're familiar with coil pots, you basically create kind of coils like these, put them together, and then smooth them over and create some sort of vessel. Well, those coils were starting to come together in a really neat way. I was really confident. I said, this is what I'm going to create. Except for the coils just kind of kept expanding. And it wasn't really becoming much of a vessel, but more of a really big bowl. And what was happening is it just kept expanding outward. And I couldn't get it to taper back in to fashion a shoulder and much less a neck. So I was desperate for help, and I didn't get it. So I had to drop the class before I failed it. This was the final straw, and I accepted, okay, ceramics was not going to be part of my creative repertoire, but that's okay, because sculptures are a different story. And here's a case in point, because I created this one when I was in high school, about a little boy who had broken all of his toys. I was clearly working out some issues here. So give me a figure to sculpt, no problem. But it was going to be art history all the way. And by the way, that ceramics experience serves as the perfect metaphor for so many other things in my life that got a little too big and beyond me. I didn't find it too funny then, but I think it's hilarious now. Okay, so here's where my stories get a little confusing. So we all live complicated lives, right? And especially those of us with a foot in many worlds. One of my worlds was the higher education world, and the other world was my work world. Now, that work world branches out even further into sub-worlds because I had to keep several jobs in order to put myself through school and to pay for my living expenses. I didn't want a roommate. Listen, I just shared a room with someone for like 17 years. The last thing I wanted to do was move in with a stranger. And so in order to do that, I had to take a few jobs. So Monday through Friday and sometimes weekends, I worked at Atlas Coffee in the city of Lakewood, which was right next door to Bellflower. There's a Little Caesars there on it, which I'm really sad to discover now. But I was a frequent customer of this coffee shop prior to working there, and I knew the original owner, Ken, and Ken was really awesome, and he made a lot of he engaged in really cool conversations. He was a Buddhist, so we always talked about these things. It was kind of one of the things that I was studying in my art history courses. So we had really great talks, enjoyed many a great cup of coffee. But one day, Ken sold his business to Chang. Chang was an incredibly talented engineer who abandoned his awe-inspiring bridge-building profession in South Korea for the American dream of entrepreneurship. The problem is that poor Chang was being taken advantage of by his employees. And so they would steal extra coffee and supplies when he was away. So one day, as I was sipping my coffee, my latte, I said sarcastically, "Hey, Chang, you should just hire me. I won't steal from you." And Chang looked up at me with the saddest, most desperate eyes, and he said, "Really? You would work here?" Well, I can't say no now. So this is how I became known as Coffee Wench, like it was a nod to medieval times. So keep in mind that this was long before Starbucks took over the coffee industry and gave its employees more dignified titles like barista. So my shift started at 5:30 until 8:45, just enough time to give Chang out of that morning rush pinch. I would then hurry off to start my shift as a bilingual instructional assistant, or more simply put, a teacher's aide, at Washington Elementary and Jefferson Elementary, located in the Bellflower Unified School District. I worked with K-6 children every day from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. or sometimes later, up until I had to go to class. And then I might go back to the coffee shop and close up. But this is where my real teaching journey began. Look at me, 18, just a baby. This is exactly how I felt though. Like, hello, it's 5:30, and then quick, I have 15 minutes to get to work. So in the beginning, I didn't know what I needed to do. They put me in a classroom with a beginning teacher who was also really young. She was nervous, she was scared. Her name was Miss Maldonado. And she really did make a great effort with her fourth grade students, but she did come from a very privileged community in LA, off the coast, and it made it really difficult to understand the local community, which is a working class, primarily Black and brown community of multilingual students. So her hand was a bit heavy sometimes with kids, and as so often happens with those of us who are ranked below classroom teachers, like instructional assistants, we're forced to watch as mistakes are made by those who are credentialed, but not necessarily highly qualified. The researcher in me says there's a future paper on that. In any case, teachers' aides were often utilized for relieving the classroom teacher of students who are linguistically diverse, students with different abilities, and students whose behavior doesn't align with the teacher's expectations. So classroom after classroom, this was the case, and my students and I were sent to the back of the room to work at a kidney table to grow our reading skills. I received some pretty neat training, though, from the district. There was a resource teacher who was really great. And at the time, we were using a program called Project Read, and the kids seemed to love it because it brought in movement and fun names for the letters and sounds. It was gimmicky, but effective. But it was missing a visual component to cue students on the sounds, and so I created my own sound spelling cards. And this is where the art kind of showed up in my space very naturally. So rather than buying some pre-made cards with A for apple, I asked the kids what image came to mind for them when they heard a certain letter sound. And what I would do is I would create a card with that image. So it was instantly tailored just for them so that it was immediately relevant to them. It came from them. So we were using tools that we co-created together. And there was the first lesson I learned. We are all capable of learning, and that happens a lot faster and more effectively when we see ourselves in the learning materials and the activities. This led me to a whole lifetime of designing materials tailored to the individual lives of my students to make them feel seen and affirmed. So special thanks to Diego, Joseph, Leilani, Telenote, Alani, and the whole crew at Washington and Jefferson. I remember all of you. So I kept at this for something like 8 years and well into graduate school. Never once considering teaching would be my final stop. Remember, I wanted to be an art historian. So originally the plan was to transfer to Long Beach State, get a degree or two in art history, and minor in geology because I wanted to be Indiana Jones. I would work in museums, have a totally exciting life, travel to Afghanistan to rescue the Bamiyan Buddhas from being blown up by the Taliban, then follow the route used by the Taliban to smuggle out ancient Buddhist artifacts. That was actually my art history thesis. It was actually on the trafficking of Buddhist artifacts out of Afghanistan. Well, 9/11 foiled my plans. No one would let me go to Afghanistan now. I literally called the State Department and asked them if there was a way to get in. And among the many hang-ups, I did get one response that informed me the only way I was going to get in was through the military. So then I wondered, so do I have to join or can I just kind of like attach myself with them? But seriously, this wasn't happening. So I stayed on at Long Beach and joined the University Art Museum, interning with them until I worked my way to assistant registrar. I got to work in the vault, wear nifty white gloves, talk to gallery folks from Gagosian at New York and a bunch of other different famous galleries. I got to secure copyright permissions for the artwork in our catalogs, and I got to meet Robert Rauschenberg. I got to meet Gerhard Richter, Catherine Wagner, and several others. It was really neat. But then one day I was hanging out in the vault. It was cold. I was with Klaus Oldenburg's niece. And it was lonely with my white gloves and my condition reports to fill out. I realized I really miss my kids. So this is one of those times when you realize you're at a fork in the road. Diego, Joseph, Telenote, Alani, and the rest of the kids at my kidney table in the back of the room were on my mind. So what was the lesson here? Follow your heart. No job is perfect, but some call you back in special ways. And teaching was one of them. And there's Andy Warhol. Actually, what was really cool, the museum actually gifted me 2 pieces of art as a going-away gift. I got if you're familiar with pop art, I got a Roy Lichtenstein plate and an Andy Warhol cow poster. Yeah, it's really cool. So there are perks to working in an art museum. But again, it's for some people, but for me, the kids were called. So, education all the way. Oh my goodness. And here the journey begins. I went on to earn a teaching credential in history, social science, mainly because I didn't feel like taking what seemed like a million courses just to become a multiple subject elementary school teacher. So, here we have a residency program where we place pre-service teachers in classrooms alongside other teachers to get firsthand experience and learning as they teach. It's the best way to learn, really. Now, consider that for 8 years, I had been in the ultimate residency program, working with teachers across all grades with all kinds of teaching styles, some who had tons to teach me and others who were more like cautionary tales and what not to do. Whatever the case, the sheer diversity of experience was invaluable, but I wasn't gonna go back to relive that. So I chose the route of least labor, and I drew from my art history training to test out of all the content areas in history, social studies, and I just took a few methods courses just to get credentialed. So around this time, the coffee shop closed. Oh, chain couldn't keep up with the competition. 2 Starbucks opened across the street. It was one of the saddest times of my life because I had so many great memories working there, and I connected with the community in really special ways. I mean, I became part of the local community, and that was really cool. But it wasn't sustainable. And so I left the coffee shop, and eventually I left the museum, and I decided to begin teaching at Bellflower High School. Go Buccaneers! On an emergency credential and on a substitute teaching basis. My first assignment. Interim teacher of algebra and pre-algebra for students in grades 9 through 12, most of whom were repeating the course for credit. This was my first self-contained assignment, and one which would establish a pattern for most of my teaching assignments as challenging. As I welcomed students, I remember feeling as though they towered over me. More and more kept coming in, and there I stood at my 5'3" height, and more kept coming in, and the seats were filling up, and I began to feel nervous until I ran out of places to seat them. I tried to shut out the voice of our math department chair, Mr. Napier, who had told me moments before to lay down the law with students from the get-go and stand my ground. What does that mean? Apparently they like to throw things, and they hit the last teacher with a textbook that was flying across the room. Not making that up. Fantastic. Textbook flying across the room. So I asked Mr. Napier, okay, how about a curriculum? Do we have something? He said, I'll get it to you soon. Meanwhile, he said, there's textbooks inside the room. Great. Sounds good. So it happened. I ran out of seats, including my desk. So I looked at my watch. Just another 45 minutes to go. No problem. I can do this. Can't leave the classroom unattended. And the kids are getting louder. And as long as we keep the books away, we should be fine. So let's get to know each other and send someone out to find more chairs. So with 42 students in class, to say this was a challenging feat on several levels is an understatement, but we finally did get enough desks and chairs. And one day, something changed. A rival gang got onto campus looking for one of my students. It took everything I had to keep my students inside the room during the active shooter lockdown. Emotions were running high as we crouched below the tinted classroom windows lining the hallway. And to this day, I don't know how I talked them down or why they even listened to me, but I think it had to do with something related to care. And I showed them that I really cared and that no way was I letting them out. It also had probably something to do with my Vitruvian man barricading in front of the door. I said, you're not getting past me. And little by little, students started trusting me. And every day I showed up was another day that brought us closer together. They invited me into their lives to learn more about them and why many of them were justice impacted, and why the resource officer kept pulling them out to check in with them, only to send them back in and me having to de-escalate so that we can go back to the business of learning. And when our time came to an end, because a teacher that was actually credentialed in math was finally hired, most interesting thing happened. They staged a revolt. This poor teacher had to endure the students chanting, Reynoso, Reynoso, we want Reynoso. I mean, they wouldn't even let the new teacher speak before they began chanting again. And as beautiful as this gesture of loyalty was, I had to go back and talk with the students about the importance of forging ahead to get their math credits. And for all the, I don't care, we want you back, and my pushing through the sting I felt in my heart that I'd be seen as one more person that walked out on them, I assured them that I'd be around. Look for me in the history classrooms, I told them. That's what I'm really supposed to be teaching anyway. If you liked what I did in math, you're going to love how I teach history. So I had the honor of wearing their jerseys on the field for homecoming. And granted, it looked more like a gown on me, but it was such an honor. And just to see their smiling faces looking back at me and saying, that's my jersey, that's my teacher, was precious. So Juanita, Christian, Jasprit, Michael, and all the math students at Bellflower High, I remember you. These students taught me to show up and to push through the fear of stepping into a situation where others have failed, because I am different. Okay. So I moved to New York after this because I got married. My husband had just finished medical school and had started his residency at the New York Eye and Ear, and I was ready to hit the ground running. I attended a teaching fair in the Bronx, not knowing that in New York, job fairs held at specific boroughs are only hiring for those boroughs. I had my portfolio of sample lessons, samples of students' work, and my resume, and I visited several booths talking to different folks. I landed at the PSMS 31 booth, the William Lloyd Garrison School, and the principal nearly lost it when she saw a rubric in my lesson plan. I remember her shouting out, "She has a rubric! Oh my gosh, Jane, she has a rubric!" Apparently rubrics were precious commodities here, and I was hired on the spot. They sold me a fabulous deal. The school apparently was for gifted children, and there'd be tons of support for new faculty and so on. Sounded amazing, and I really needed a job, so I signed on the spot to teach 8th grade US history. A few weeks later, September was upon us, and I was reporting to work for staff development to kick off the year. It's not a bad idea, by the way, to visit a site physically before signing a contract to work there, because a couple of things were a little off. First, the principal was a totally different person. Apparently, that other principal that hired me had left. I remember this principal saying something that stays with me to this day. She said to the whole staff, one of the first things she said is, "I don't want to hear any BMW." I remember thinking, what is BMW? And if you're also wondering, I'll give you the M and the W and let you infer what the B stands for. The M stands for moaning. The W stands for whining. I had never heard an administrator speak this way. And I noticed the science teacher next to me was rolling his eyes and just muttered whatever. The other thing I noticed was the building. The first 2 floors of the elementary classrooms were really bright and cheery, and the 3rd floor middle school where I was working was really dim and dreary. Classrooms weren't even air conditioned. And there were no screens, no computers, no technology of any kind, and the classrooms were a little dilapidated. Paint was falling off the walls, the boards were scratched. And so those smart boards were beginning to show up in schools. Projectors and computers had been around. So I was surprised to find that we didn't have any. Now, just to give you a little more context about the area. So in the winter, it snows in New York, sometimes several feet. That year it snowed a lot. And in the Bronx, in certain neighborhoods, especially the South Bronx, they don't really plow the streets unless there's an ATM or a bank. Then they'll plow just that little patch. So it was a concrete jungle, forgotten by the world, and no one was coming. And that really stayed with me. No one was coming. If a fight were to break out, there's no one to call because no one's coming. If you need a resource teacher, no one's coming. We didn't have any. So it was a very tough place to live. We were 1 week out from the start of class, and I hadn't met any students yet. They would arrive next week, which meant I had 4 days or so to get my classroom in shape. What did that mean? It meant using my credit card for the very first time, something I had avoided doing since I was 18 years old. And so it was supposed to be for emergencies, and I thought, this is definitely an emergency. I figure I'll pay it off as I get my first paycheck. What was the emergent goal? It was to claim the space for students and with them to make them feel like they mattered. And with that, their learning experiences were worthy of a beautiful classroom, a high-quality curriculum that pushed them to think about history in ways that connected to their lives, and to show up as a teacher that deeply respected them. So I took my credit card for a spin and used it to buy an Epson projector, a new laptop, some classy threads, and some comfortable heels for walking up the treacherous Grand Concourse, and something colorful to cover up the ugly paint-chipped and scraped-up walls. I also bought tons of poster board for some nice signs, a few bins for some new classroom supplies. By the time I was finished, my classroom looked beautiful, and I dare say it rivaled the kindergarten classrooms. I wish I had pictures, but I don't. It's one of those things where I can really recall it in my mind. I really decorated the room with primary colors. It was really beautiful. My signage was really nice, but I did keep several pieces of my students' work that I found to be absolutely beautiful engagements with our course content and their deep meaning making and rich history. So just to let you know. They proudly identified as West Indian, Guyanese, West African, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Spanish, African American, Black, or any combination of these. Our conversations often revolved around food, and I knew that many of my students were food insecure, so I often showed up to class with Dunkin' Donut holes, probably against all school regulations. But I didn't care. They were hungry, and you can't learn if you're hungry. And maybe it wasn't the healthiest option, but donut holes were convenient to carry, and Dunkin' Donuts was on the way to school, and I could also get myself a really giant cup of coffee. Most importantly, they made my students happy. I also wore suits to work every day, which in retrospect, I think made the neighborhood think that I was some kind of law enforcement officer or like a ranking political official. But that came in really handy on Fridays when I had to walk my students home to their apartments to make sure they didn't get jumped by by the kids from the rival projects. I don't know what I thought I was gonna do, all 5'3" of me, like walking in, like I'm gonna protect you. But I think it was the way I carried myself, and I did get this scowl on my face from riding the subway with all my AV equipment, just to say, like, back off. And you can see, like, here, I refuse to Botox myself because I know that this is a sign of my life working in riding the subways in New York. So when we did get down to the teaching and learning, I always aimed to build a curriculum that placed my students at the center. Remember my earlier tradition of customizing everyone's learning experiences and learning materials to optimize the relevancy and engagement? Well, I was tasked with teaching U.S. history, and in 8th grade, we covered topics of slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction, so special care had to be taken. You see, many of my students were first generation or traced their lineage to the geographies from which enslaved persons were taken. So this was the first time I had to potentially teach triggering content about some of the darkest moments in our history. And it was a real gut check. How can I teach this content so that my students would have the necessary information to be able to do well on the 8th grade social studies state test, but still attend to their well-being? So I leaned into art, of course, to provide a way to engage, and I actually made use of some really beautiful materials that were gifted to me from the New York Historical Society. I was working with a program that worked with teachers and provided us with some really neat materials. They had just released this exhibit called Slavery in New York. And I was given a set of cards, class set of these kinds of cards, featuring the beautifully written biographies of persons who were enslaved. I wanted us to humanize this learning by selecting one card that students could engage individually and where they could create a square that would go on a quilt that we would piece together to create a tapestry of people, the stories of people. I still have the quilt, and though some of the squares have been lost or torn, I still think it's one of the most powerful ways we uplifted the experiences of those whose stories have been silenced. And they took really good care. In great care in generating some of these squares. They're commemorative. So we also put Abraham Lincoln on trial, using his own words from primary source documents to complicate the elementary school construction of Lincoln as decisively an altruistic actor. When students read how his position on slavery shifted from his earlier stance as a move for political gain, they were shocked. Across all my sections, we actually had hung juries, some in defense of Lincoln's position while others condemning it. But the discourse was so rich because they were able to appreciate the complexity of all of the issues occurring at this time, and also to not just take this idea of Lincoln as a hero at face value. Well, across all of these sections was a testament to the complexity of my students' thinking, their negotiation, and powerful discourse. And they had 2nd or 3rd grade reading levels. Often derided by the science teacher and abandoned by 5 ELA teachers in 1 year, we had a revolving door of ELA teachers, and 5 of them walked out. They couldn't take it. I'll also add that several of my students were well beyond the typical age for an 8th grader. Most were around 15 or 16, and Louis Lewis was 17, going on 18. He'd repeated the 8th grade 2 times already. The system had failed them. Lewis was very special. He took care of his young sister and had to be the parent in the absence of his young mother, who might disappear for days at a time. Sometimes he and his sister went without food after school, and I remember how his sister would often ask him to get her something to drink. So Lewis would grow annoyed with his little sister and say, "Not right now." Every now and then, I would take them to the corner bodega and buy them some snacks and some drinks. Over time, Lewis had internalized a lot of deficit discourse about his learning, his reading skills, and one day he was at a breaking point. The math teacher had said something to Lewis, and he tried to walk away until the math teacher grabbed at his hoodie from behind. Lewis went into a fury, and he grabbed a steel rod that we used to open windows, and he went after the math teacher. I stepped outside of my classroom to find out what was happening, and I intercepted Lewis mid-chase. We took some breaths, he let go of the rod, and we talked through his feelings. More importantly, we avoided calling in law enforcement, because in this neighborhood, to be taken away means never coming back the same. Never coming back a free kid. Sterling was our sad reminder of that. He had to join the Latin Kings in order to guarantee his safety inside, and once out, he was committed without any chance of severing his ties. I tell this story because I carry Lewis with me to this day, close to my heart. The best memory I have of him was on the last day of school. As we walked in opposite directions, Lewis was way over there, I was somewhere over here, and he had finally graduated 8th grade. And as he stops at the corner, he turns around and says, "Hey, Miss Reynoso, thank you." Oh, there's so many more stories like this related to my time in the South Bronx that are bittersweet, like getting kicked out of the movie theater during the end of the year treat to watch Ghost Rider. And then there's also some stories that are too emotional to tell out loud. I may write them down someday or illustrate them as a graphic novel. But the greatest lesson I took from my students at PSMS 31 was to endeavor to create beautiful and aesthetically appealing spaces that hold everyone in a place of dignity and nurturing, whether with food, with language, with resources, with high expectations, and the sensibilities to set them up successfully to meet those expectations. And then also let them corner you into a bet where you negotiate a deal that if they study for the state test and do well, you'll finally let them braid your hair at the end of the school year. So there you go. So to Ayana, who was responsible for this beautiful braid work, and to Paige, Mary Ellen, Sterling, Aliger, Lewis, and all the amazing souls from the South BX, I remember you. Okay, so while I was in the South Bronx, I would get random visitors from the city. And each time somebody tried to visit, I had to open the door because I always locked it from the outside. I always got scolded for that, but I did it for a good reason. The kids from the neighboring school, because in New York, several schools can exist in one building. So the neighboring school, Lou Gehrig, had some kids that always wanted to try and come into my classroom and beat up my kids. So no, I'm locking the door. It's a safety thing. Anyway, lots of folks came in to watch what we were doing in my room. From Manhattan. They were with an initiative called the American Leaders Project, and they were so impressed with what I was doing that they invited me to be a teacher trainer with the Department of Education. They said, "Reynoso's got the kids under control. They're happy, they're learning, they've got rubrics." And then something neat happened. I got a phone call from someone who told me I should contact a principal who's looking to hire an 8th grade humanities teacher in Manhattan. He's apparently an amazing and visionary leader, and everyone thinks he's the bee's knees. Meanwhile, Principal BMW was carrying out some unethical shenanigans and escalating her mistreatment of students and staff. She eventually got busted for her shenanigans, something like having another person clock in thousands of hours and dollars in overtime, and she left campus even while she had left campus and was already home in New Jersey, so some kind of illegal machinations there. So the other thing that she did was she was using some of the school funds to pay for some of her daughter's Sweet 16 favors, which I thought was really odd. Anyway, the time card thing is what I find ironic because there was a time when we were being audited by the city and I had to be there. in order to participate because I was selected to be one of the people who were going to speak to the city officials about what was going on in our school. And I was very sick. I had walking pneumonia and a fever well over 100. And I walked through the snow just to be there. And in my delirium, we had time cards over there. We punched our cards in and out every day. And so in my delirium, I forgot to punch in my card when I got there. And so I had asked permission to go home early because I was really sick. So I just kind of did the interview and then left. I punched out. It was a mistake. They thought it was interpreted as I had shown up to work at about 10:30. So they marked me late, even though they knew that I had been there. And so I asked many times for them to please remove that from my record, from my file. And they said, sure, sure, sure. But the principal never did because she knew that I was going to go to, she knew about this invitation that I was being asked to interview at a school in Manhattan. So the world has a funny way of working out, though, because the irony there of the time card thing. Anyway, so I moved on to the Upper East Side and worked with one of the coolest leaders by the name of Mr. Getz, David Getz. And I fully credit him for inspiring me to pursue my master's in leadership and administrative credential to be a principal. It's because of him that I wanted to be a leader. To watch him among kids, staff, and parents was like watching a celebrity walk the halls. Everyone loved him, and he loved everybody, and he showed it. He was super smart. For years, I never even knew the guy had a PhD. He was so humble, and he didn't have to flex his degrees. He was simply Mr. Getz, the coolest principal that ever was. Well, aside from my mom. What a breath of fresh air after BMWs and time cards. Here was a guy who respected his teachers and his students and regularly set them up for success. You told him what you needed and he got it for you. He spent the bulk of his day walking the halls and sitting in classrooms watching kids learn, and he just smiled, a kind of Santa Claus smile, satisfied with his community. To this day, I have not seen anything quite like Eastside Middle. It was a community of some of the brightest minds because in New York, you have secondary schools that are admission basis. They're public schools, but you have to apply to be admitted. So can you imagine fifth graders showing up with their portfolios, their report cards, and for an interview to get into this school? Well, that's what we had here. And one of the cool things about working in this school is I got to see kind of what a school that's very well resourced looks like, right? And how we can really push students, what an accelerated level of learning looks like when we continue to grow students' learning. So we engage the Facing History curriculum, and if any of you have ever watched the Netflix show Never Have I Ever, it's the teaching curriculum that history teacher has, like we're now gonna do Facing History. Back then, it was only for high school. I hear now that Facing History has a middle school curriculum, but you can imagine I'm doing a high school curriculum with 8th graders. And we did tweak it to bring in some literature like Melba Patila Beal's Warriors Don't Cry and Elie Wiesel's Night to really delve deeply into topics of racism, justice, resilience, and genocide long before these things started showing up in education as they do today. More importantly, Mr. Getz was a fan of comics, and he let me start a graphic novels library in my room, which became instantly popular with all the adolescent boys. But because we had so many reluctant readers, the library kept expanding. You might remember I'm also a huge fan and regular attendee at San Diego's Comic-Con. My husband and I planned our vacation time around it, so comics were really big in my world as well. But the boys who were my students in Eastside Middle were regularly getting into trouble with teachers and the assistant principal who handled all the matters of discipline. Mr. Getz never handled matters of discipline. Well played, Mr. Getz, so that he got to keep his popularity intact. Anyway, these boys weren't doing so well in their classes, often due to the fact that they liked goofing around. Some of them had IEPs, and, well, they had very vocal parents also who would show up and demand explanations for why their children were not being included in the curriculum or in day-to-day interactions, why they were always punished and getting in trouble. So I remember even Mr. Getz had to show up and sit in our meetings when the moms would come. All right. Well, by now you know a little bit about some of the things that I've already seen and done in some of the places like LA and the South Bronx, so you might be able to understand why I had a hard time seeing a problem here with just a little bit of goofing around. I thought, we don't have a problem here. What we have here is an engagement issue. Have we tried to figure out what these boys like? because it looks like they like comics and graphic novels. They read through those books so fast, I couldn't even keep up with the supply and demand. And there it was. We went on to establish the Graphic Novels Boys Club, which you see here. The story of which I captured here in this comic, and I presented at the National Conference of Teachers of English as part of a workshop called Beyond Graphic Novelty, Transforming Hype into Powerful Practice. Mr. Getz also made this part of his principal performance review. So we worked for many weeks. The boys actually showed up before school, 3 days a week. And we got to read I Am Legend. Not a comic book because it didn't exist. It was the text. It was a pretty challenging text as well. But here was the sell. The sell was, hey guys, if we can read through this, we can create our own graphic novel interpretation of this text. And therein was the sell, hook, line, and sink. So the boys showed up. We got money. And we actually got an artist to do his residency with us, to work with us on how to craft the actual structure of a graphic novel. And this is the final product, I Am Legend. And we had a print run of a couple of hundred that we circulated throughout the school and across Manhattan. And we really generated a buzz around town. But two amazing things came from this work. First, the boys' moms were incredibly happy, and they shared how their boys looked forward to coming to school and found a great sense of purpose in this group. And the second was earning the privilege of expanding this work into our humanities classroom and positioning the boys as leaders for our work around transforming Elie Wiesel's book, Night, into a graphic novel. And this is one of the most powerful and personal pieces of work that my students generated at Eastside to honor Wiesel's testimony and that of their ancestors. So it is, to this day, it's just amazing. And I have it here because I'm so proud of it. But I chose just two of these images because some of them are just so powerful and emotional. But if you want to see them, I will invite you to engage with them. But I didn't want to just kind of throw them up there without enough context. So from Eastside Middle, I learned to use the arts to call others in and to expand access for individuals that interact with the world in various ways, and to always make room for comics and graphic novels everywhere I go. So thank you, Daniel, Oliver, John, Ben, and Daniel G. I remember you. Oh, let's see here. Oh, moving to Brooklyn now. So failure is not an option. Okay, sometimes it is an option because you get to learn from it, but I'm not talking about that kind of failure because that luxury doesn't exist when you're dealing with kids' lives. So after a year-long absence from New York, living in Canada, while my husband did his fellowship, I came back and took a job at a Brooklyn charter school teaching global history to 9th and 10th graders. I came in mid-year to replace a teacher who had just been dismissed, and just for overall being a really terrible person to kids. The pass rate for the students was only 20%. And that meant that they weren't going to get their credits and graduate on time. Failure was not an option. So I got creative and I got a little silly to get them to smile, just a little. I dressed up in costumes for my lessons, and one of the most memorable times was the time I came in a hooded robe that concealed my face. I purchased some Halloween warts, and I put them all over myself because we were studying the Black Plague. And I also purchased some rubber rats and sprinkled them around the school. I didn't ask for permission. And then, wouldn't you know, an unannounced fire drill. And I have to go outside to the street wearing my robe and all these warts on my face. You could hear the screams from blocks away. Well, the students remembered that and other experiential learning activities that allowed us to play around with and within historical contexts. We played World War I trench warfare and rushed the classroom diving behind trenches that we fashioned out of our desks. And we played Reynoso Toy Factory to relive child labor during the Industrial Revolution. Our task was to create 100 paper dolls for the Reynoso Toy Factory in 20 minutes amid harrowing climate, noise, and smell. I bought heaters to turn up the temperature, and then I also played really loud sounds, and I also kind of opened cans of cat food just to make it smelly in there. So how did we do on the test? My students knocked it out of the park. We beat out the city's average with a pass rate of 75, including my students with IEPs. So the lesson here is making bold choices and doing whatever it takes, because failure is not an option. So Ashley, the two Jasmines, Rashunda, and all the amazing minds in Brooklyn, I remember you. Look at that, how happy. So for those who might have already noticed, I am indeed reprising the outfit I wore for my dissertation defense, the one that comes up every time someone Googles me and you see me standing there in front of these paintings. Were it any other outfit, I'd probably get tired of seeing it all the time, but instead I feel proud because not only did I design the fabric, but it's also composed of the dreams that my students wrote from an assignment I gave them where I asked them, what is your dream for yourself? And so maybe I'll have to send out a print for a different color so I don't get bored of it. But I thought since I'm honoring my students, I would wear this today. So for my dissertation, I worked with multilingual learners here in San Diego. I returned to San Diego because I had a child and I didn't want to do the whole subway thing. And so I understood the importance of really seeing and working with children and letting them have a voice to see if I could apply everything that I had learned so that students would be able to move in ways that would actually change the system that was inequitable for them. So this is taking it to a different level, right? We're getting political now. And they did. I led 3 teams of youth researchers, and they designed 3 totally different projects. One of them that even got us an audience with an assembly member at the state of California to change the way in which home language surveys are distributed when students are registered in our public schools. That would immediately send them into that English learner track. And so some of the things that the students came up with were really innovative and very much grounded in their own lived experiences. Another project that my students designed related to how the LPAC test, which is the test they have to pass every year, they have to take a test that determines whether or not they're able to reclassify as English proficient. And so many of my students had not been able to do that for 6, 7 years. Come on, is it a language thing or have we not done our job as teachers? Got to ask these questions because they can't move out of this category or access electives in high school until they get out of this track, and the only way they can get out of this track is to pass this test. Talk about inequities. This is what they painted. When they applied what they learned from their research, they actually kind of asked their peers who were not English learners, what did they think about it? They said, this test is trash, I can't believe you have to take it. So they created this painting with 2 ladders, one that they have to climb, which is all broken, and one that their non-English learner peers get to go up and go down a fun slide. And you can see there's Cheetos and all kinds of goodies along that ladder. And then the last group really thought, you know what? The way our parents receive our test scores doesn't even make any sense. It doesn't have any good information. It doesn't tell us anything. Nobody can understand them. So what did they do? They redesigned it in a way that made sense to them. So they redesigned their own data report with good information, with good data that actually helps people understand what do they need to do and what are the goals that they need to accomplish or set out there. And then they want to see accountability. They're signing it. They want their parents to sign it. They want their teachers to sign it. And they want their principals to sign it. Boom. And this is their art. These canvases are monumental canvases. They're about 9 feet by 4.5 feet. And they've traveled a few places. And it's really interesting because, again, you see that theme of the 2 paths for ELs and non-ELs. And out of my 15 long-term English learner students during my research, 13 of them passed the test. So I'm really proud of this work. So from my students, I learned the gift of, again, failure is not an option, and that art does hold room for possibility and political action. Okay, I'm going to finish with my greatest student of all time. So the person who came up with this idea of the reading rope, somebody by the name of Hollis Scarborough, has to do with the science of reading. But I think one of the most interesting things that I've read about this person is how she admits that she never taught anyone to read. If that's true, I can't imagine a greater travesty, because as someone who has taught hundreds of kids to read, I assure you, you're missing out on one of the most greatest, precious gifts that you can give to another person. So I'm going to end my presentation with my daughter, Mina. So when I moved to San Diego to stay home with my daughter, what does a teacher, researcher do when you decide to be a stay-at-home parent? You dress up your kid in all kinds of costumes and take their pictures. Take pictures for Halloween, make up a little mini surgeon. My husband's a surgeon. There's Mina. There's us at Comic-Con. But seriously, the best move I ever made, there she is reading with her dad, some kind of medical report. Mina was eager to learn, as all children are. But one of the best things that I did was to leave New York. Not going to do the subway thing. No way. Not going to do that with a kid. Not going to do that with a kid. Can you imagine carrying diapers? Amazon wasn't a thing yet. So this was the greatest move I made, was to open a classroom in my own home for my child. And this is where I wanted to apply everything that I had learned to see how far can I push a young person's mind from the get-go. And I did. And this is our classroom at home. And this is Mina. As her literacy and language grew, like Bob books weren't going to cut it. So we actually got access to a friends and family program. And this program allowed Mina to really expand her language. And I was able to document it from the age of 3 all the way up to the age of 7. And Mina flourished. And if I had more time, I would show it to you, a little clip of it. But I'll make this presentation accessible if you want to watch some of it, for sure. I'm all about sharing. So I want to conclude, again, just kind of capturing the major lessons that I learned from my students, including this idea of showing up excited to work together, that everyone can learn and we do it better when we see ourselves in the learning, to pay attention to the forks in the road and follow our hearts, to push through the noise of others because you're different, to create a nourishing space that holds everyone in dignity, to understand that art is access and there's access in art, and access is in art, and to counter failure with joyful and bold opportunities. And finally, the gift of language and literacy is precious. Thank you. Class dismissed.